So, ladies and gentlemen, as OG, we agree to prioritizing essentials worker to get vaccinated first, even in the trade-off of giving the elderly vaccine after after these essential workers. Because we believe that in OG, we want the government to protect the most vulnerable actor in that is being impacted by the COVID situation. I'm going to bring two substances in this debate. First, why it is justified, and second, why it will be more effective. So for the first about justification, in our status quo, essential workers has been so wrong, has been treated so wrong by our government. Like we can see by first they get lack of tools, get lack of protection. Like for example, we can see in the early day of COVID, they even like use raincoat to protect themselves and something like that. And for the second, they also underpaid, especially for this essential worker that's like living in rural area that is like don't have any facility, don't have any salary like people in the city. And also the last thing that this essential workers must have to like their opinion like about COVID are being ignored by the government. Like we can see like for in our minister like saying that COVID is not that bad, COVID is it will pass and something like that uh without like thinking about how these essential workers already like fighting every single day to protect themselves, to protect the society. And we say that essential and also like in essentials, why we say that this is justified, we say that essential workers are the one that is most prone to COVID at the very first place. We can see like they're the people that is like treating these people with COVID, that is like they are the one that is like sacrificing themselves, like not going home. They cannot go to their family and something like that, and they like sacrificing themselves to like treating people in like in COVID situation. And we say that it is justified to when the government already like, and it shows that when government already like wrong this essential workers and like the social workers, these essential workers are that vulnerable. We say that vaccination is the most important thing for them to get at the very first place, because when they already have this vaccination, they will be like it shows the government intention to protect these essential workers, and it shows the government are trying to protect and give them the best so they can work and help other peoples in the very first place. We say that this is the most important thing for government to do, because these people are the most vulnerable actor that is the most impacted because of the COVID situation. And moving on to my second substantive about efficacy. So I have two layers of substances here. First is we say that uh, we say that when we give the vaccination towards these essential workers, it's actually going to be easier for like vaccine tracking, because they are the one that is understand about the side effect and they're also the one that is like consistently like have a contact with people with COVID, and it shows about how the vaccine will work, about the side effect, and also like it will be easier for the government to like track the vaccine and something like that. And the second thing, and even if and we say that it's okay for us to like to like sacrificing elderly, because first thing first, just because we give this vaccination towards essential workers doesn't mean that this elderly people doesn't have will not get vaccination at all. But in our side of the house, after the good amount of essential workers already having vaccine, the elderly will get vaccination also in our side of the house. And we say that it will be more it will be more practical if we put the elderly after the essential workers, because we factually Sinovac, the vaccine that we use in Indonesia, are like having like a disclaimer that it cannot be given to people with certain disease or like certain age and something like that. Before that, I'm going to take PI from CO.
I think that vaccine tracking and the vaccines that exist already have certain mechanisms and have already been tested. Why is your case still important?
We say that it is still important because we say that these essential workers are the one that is truly understand this, right? Because yes, they probably already have the mechanism, but I think for the practicality about what it will really be happen, and like what will it be in your body, I think these essential workers are the one that is understand it even more. And also this is also show that we actually like don't want to sacrifice. We protect the elderly because in our side of the house we say that we don't know what will be the side effect for the elderly, because they probably like their health is not that good as like this as like this young people and something like that. And also we say that it is more practical because in status quo, people elderly can have the alternative to not contact with people with COVID. Meanwhile, we say that these essential workers need to have like constantly contacting with people in COVID and something like that, because the elderly like have the alternative to like stay at home to like be with their family and something like that, and uh, don't have to like go outside and something like that. And we say this shows about why in our side of the house vaccinating these essential workers will be more important will be more important, and will shows that we as the government will protect the vulnerable actor. And I'm proud to propose.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for the amazing speech. Now I welcome the Leader of Opposition. Here.
Check, am I audible?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay. Disclaimer here: if you want to POI, you can just like unmute yourself. However, please be considerate and don't constantly attack me every 1 or 5 seconds. Okay. I'm going to start my speech in 3, to what? Opening government cannot come into this debate and saying that, oh, you can give this elderly vaccination because the vaccine have this kind of side effect that is unknown to them. Look, if the vaccine does give this kind of side effect towards the elderly, then why you give it to essential worker? Isn't it going to be a zero sum game where the essential worker are damaged in any way, and your cares cannot fly that way, right? That's why in this debate we should assume the best case scenario that the vaccine actually work. Like if the vaccine does work, which one should we prioritize first? The essential worker or the elderly first, right? And we say in opposition we want the elderly to come ahead before the essential worker because how they are more prone in this debate, right? Right. That's why you need to play into this kind of debate. Right? And not only that, if they tell you that okay, elderly can choose to not contact people at all. Look, not everyone. Look, number one in Indonesia, the policy for you to actually not work from home is actually not very widespread. There are still elderly who actually need to go to job. There are elderly who become kuli bangunan in order for them to earn money to live for themselves, right? That's why we think this is not something that you can get into the debate. Yeah, all other argument, all other rebuttal will be integrated in my argument. Right? What I'm going to talk about here, number one, on principle, why this is bad, and number two, what I'm going to tell you the harm. Right? Okay, number one, principally, it will how this prioritization would destroy the principle that has been built around the essential worker, right? In which the essential worker sacrifice themselves for their civic duty in order to become the frontliner and to protect the civilian, right? If they choose to actually accept the vaccine, it means that they actually prioritize themselves and not the civilian that they are trying to protect. Not only that, the moment this essential worker choose to become essential worker, they are consented to actually sacrifice themselves to go into the front line in order to protect the existing civilian that exists right now, right? That's why this prioritization of essential worker over elderly is something that is against the very principle of this kind of essential worker, right? It means that you precede your civic duty over the civilian that you are trying to protect, right? We think this is something that is very, very wrong, right? And if government want to talk about efficacy or utilitarianism mechanics, right? I'm going to tell you why elderly are very more prone, and the moment this elderly get out, it's going to be less effective compared to what government said to the house. Like, okay, welcome to my second argument. We concede, okay, essential workers are more prone to infection because the job that they have, the risk of contracting the virus is very large. However, essential workers have a very huge safety net. Like, government can came to the debate and say that, oh, they are not protected. Okay, maybe in the beginning of COVID-19, they are not that protected. However, as time goes by, there are so many safety net that they gain. That are given by the Indonesian government because they are seen as very, very important. You can see this in campaign of Anies to protect essential worker, to actually respect the essential worker, or you can see this in social media where there are a large amount of people who donate money for this essential worker in social media in kitabisa.com. You can see that literally everywhere. That's why they have a huge amount of safety net. Not only that, they are working in a very strict health protocols. They need to wear masks. They need to apply disinfectant every 1 hour. They need to check everyone, and this is something that is written in the law by the government that force the contractor of this essential worker to apply this very, very strict health protocol. Not only that, let's talk about what if they got contracted COVID-19, right? If they contracted by COVID-19, they still have insurance that protect the essential worker to cover their health costs. And not only that, you need to understand that essential workers are majority coming from middle to young age, right? In which when they got COVID-19, the impact isn't gonna that big compared to elderly who going to call it. That's why there's this huge amount of large safety net that can be covered by essential worker. But let's talk about elderly. Right? Why is it different? But when it's elderly, they are more prone to COVID-19 because usually as they grow older, they have like more disease inside their body that can be activated when they caught coronavirus. You can see this in the case of so many patients that becomes complication, like they suddenly have TBC or any kind of this disease. It became complicated to handle this kind of case. Right? Not only that, the care for the elderly people requires large amount of human resources compared to younger people because because they need to not only take care of the coronavirus but the other disease that they got infected as well, right? The complication that they got as well, right? That's why if government want to talk about utility, the risk of elderly got caught by coronavirus can create a massive burden to the frontliner. This is exactly the reason why in New Zealand they are protecting the elderly by quarantining them and prioritizing them in protection, or in Canada where the amount of protection that elderly got are higher because they understand that the human resources that you requires to take care for this elderly when they got caught by COVID-19 are very, very burdening, right? Compared to when younger people got caught by this infected by this COVID-19. That's why we have to prioritize the elderly first before essential worker, because even though the essential worker are more prone, at the very least they have a huge amount of safety net comparatively to the elderly, who is very, very prone to the disease, right? And with this shortage of And if you want to claim, oh, there will be a shortage of essential worker, it's not going to happen, right? Because in opposition side, we cut the root of the issue, right? We give vaccination towards the people when toward this elderly in order to protect them from the coronavirus, thus creating a less burden for the essential worker or the health worker to do their job in fighting COVID-19. That's why we are very proud to oppose.
Thank you for that speech, Leader of Opposition. Now I welcome the Deputy Prime Minister here.
Test. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll take my POIs in the chat. If you have any POIs, please don't unmute yourself. I promise to take one from closing opposition. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The important argument that comes from Cecil's speech is not only, for example, the parts about it being effective, because this debate doesn't only talk about that. This debate should talk about the role of a government and how they best fulfill their purpose in serving its people, right? Therefore, I think that the important part that was not discussed at all by like Sam's case is regarding how government is like being willfully ignorant and is directly contributing to the impact that we're seeing right now, right? Talking about how essential workers are the one that is taking the biggest hit as a direct result of coronavirus, right? Talking about how the number of essential workers, that includes doctor, that includes nurses, and that includes other healthcare workers, has been like decreased down to 1/3 of what we initially had, right? This isn't only because of like COVID being a deathly virus, but this is because the incompetence and the willful ignorance coming from the government of Indonesia, right? We've seen them, for example, multiple times refusing to concede that this is a major issue and therefore needs like more stricter policies, like immediate lockdown or like banning people from working from offices and having like much more frequent razzia of people, whether or not they're wearing a mask and so on and so forth, right? So what I'm going to do in my speech is I'm going to explain like the further harms in the form of two clashes. First of all, regarding what best is the obligation of the government. Second of all, regarding what's better and what's more effective for Indonesia in the long run. So first one, in all the rebuttals will be integrated into my speech. So before I go on into these two clashes, one clarification, right? I don't think that we need to take into the fiat that like the vaccine is indeed like something that's already proven to be effective, because that's not the current status quo, right? Because COVID vaccine is something that's demanded in such an urgent period, in such an urgent time, it's factually true that China did not properly go through like the third phase in making sure that these vaccines work. That means that the vaccine testing only went through phase 1 and phase 2, which was only tested for example, first of all, among people of productive age, and then eventually people of productive age, but outside of China, so people of another race, right? The third phase should have been for like the elderly people, the people who are sick, and so on and so forth. But for a proper phase 3 to be brought out, it needs to take a minimum of 3 years. So that's actually part of the debate, right? That to a certain level risky, but even in my speech, I'm going to prove why it's okay for us to impose this kind of risk better on like essential workers and healthcare workers, right? This is why it's also important. It's also important for them to defend. Like just read like the surah at-Edaran coming from the Ministry of Health, you'll see that this is actually factually true. But moving on, what's the obligation of the government, right? They try to argue to you that, look, there are people in the current status quo who still have to work. They are elderly people. They're not necessarily. So to protect the civilians and the workers, you need to start with the elderly, right? We don't think that this is true. If anything, we think that this is weird, right? Because in a moment of time where everyone is forced to work from home, in a moment of time where it's necessary for you to like do everything remotely, you're not even allowed to see your families and friends, how is it that people are still going to office, right? The reason being the elderly people are not the ones who's in control of whether or not they have to go to office. It's not them in control of the decision whether they want to work from home or not. We think that this isn't the fault of like the elderly per se, and this is the burden for them to shoulder alone, but this is the fault of like the capitalistic offices and the capitalistic bosses that force them to like deny health protocols and still go to work anyway, right? So the problem is how to make them work safe from the office, but how do we make sure that these offices do not have the power and like let these people stay at home and be safe in the comfort of their own houses, right? We think that so two responses regarding this is that, first of all, there is already undergoing effort to make sure that people are safe at homes, right? We're like enforcing and strengthening and like strengthening the laws regarding like how the procedure for working from home is, how we're going to punish offices who are like unlawfully forcing their workers to come to the office and so on and so forth, right? So on doing this will only be backtracking, and it will create an inconsistency in policies, right? What this will create is that people will become confused regarding how much they're allowed to go out and so on and so forth. So we think that this is just counterproductive. But second way is that we think that exactly by giving the elderly the vaccine first, this will only serve as a justification for these capitalistic offices, right? Because now that you have like an avenue to protect yourself, there is no reason for you to not to go to work. Despite, for example, Sinovac vaccine only have 50% efficacy in Brazil, for example. So we think that it's still risky, but this risk will only serve as a justification even more for unlawful and like just objectively bad practices. So in terms of obligation of the government, we don't think that they fulfill. But second of all, regarding like the long-term benefits to this, right? We think that what's going to happen better on our side of the house is regarding the impact, right? We think that currently, but even before in the current status quo, working in healthcare is something that's seen as risky, something that most people simply do not want to do, right? Reason being, one, it's so expensive. Second of all, you're going to have to suffer a lot. And we think that this takes the biggest toll in the current status quo, right? Where we are exposed to just how severe the lacking of like healthcare workers and like capable healthcare workers in Indonesia is, right? The fact that we do not have enough to cater in simply like our most populated and our most developed cities like Jabodetabek, much worse in the rural areas, right? We think that what happens if the government does not prioritize the essential workers is you're going to further disincentivize people from joining the health force, right? Talking about how people do not want to become doctors, but in the future, even more people do not want to become doctors, right? The fact being that it's such an overworking, underpaying job, and the fact that you are the first people to be exposed to the harms of like all these diseases and so on and so forth, we think that what's going to happen is you're going to cripple the amount of health force that Indonesia has in the future, right? This harms not only the current people who are suffering from COVID, but even in the future, if you are under the threat of, for example, experiencing pandemics or other epidemics, you will not be equipped with enough amount of doctors simply because you cannot make sure that they want to stay inside an industry that does not cater to them, that does not want to protect them, right? So government needs to step up now and needs to prove that they are willful and they understand that essential workers are like indeed through their name essential, important to them, right? We need to be able to facilitate the remaining amount of people we have to make sure that they stay alive, just to make sure that all the people who are like tested positive for COVID are able to survive. But second of all, to make sure that people in the future are also able to survive, right? So for all of these reasons, what have I done to you today? The exclusive contributions that come from our side of the house is we recognize what it looks like when you protect these essential workers and how this will essentially like benefit the rest of Indonesia. Second of all, we also brought to you the principle of why the government should best doing this, and it should be their duty to fulfill it now. Proud to propose.
Thank you, DPM, for that fine speech. Now, to continue the case of opening opposition, I welcome the Deputy Leader of Opposition here.
Okay, let me put out my timer. Okay, I will. Oh yeah, kalau ada POI, just unmute yourself. Just make sure to give some jeda between the POI, like 20 seconds or something. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think that if we talk about Indonesian condition, even before the vaccine was there, people in the local government are already starting to be loose on the policies and practice of lockdown and social distancing in itself due to financial pressure and like due to the psychological pressure that lockdown brings, right? So I think that you already cannot stop working age people from working or going out. So in terms of like having contact with like young and adult infectees with or without symptom is pretty equal between the elderly and the essential worker in itself. So I think that that worst case is already there. I don't think that giving the vaccine to the elderly will like fuel people to like be as as free as they want to be, because there is already the condition that is happening in the status quo. And I think that the death toll and the fact that people are already dying from COVID-19 will not lead people to become like more robust and become more carefree in their doing. However, it will make them adhere more to the idea of the new normal. So we do understand that to some extent people will feel like, oh, it's safer now, I can go out now, the vaccine is underway, this is a temporary cost that I'm willing to take if I'm going to get infected or something, I'm going to get treated. I think that those things is already mitigated by how people are already habituating themselves to the new normal, right? How sanitation and everything is already becoming a habit, how the provision of like sanitation things from offices and from public places is already there and people are already using it. I think that those kind of things is already offsetting the risk that people have when they now are starting to go out again. I think that the tipping point is that as long as people are already adjusting to the new normal and there is vaccine that is underway, the likelihood of I think that the likelihood is that the worst case is not really as bad as how the government team have pictured, right? I will bring two extensions in this debate. First, I think that when we talk about the parallel example of like why principally the health institution is just like any other state apparatus, like army or firefighter, where they put civilian over their own life, Sam has also explained how utilitarian principle defies the nature of the narrative that is built around the essential workers in itself, which is important to habituate society into wanting to cooperate with the state apparatus in itself. Because I think that when people are not complying with government policies, it's not the fault of the government, it's not the fault of the essential worker, and it's not the fault of the people, but it's the fault of the crisis that happens so suddenly, making everyone unable to adjust with the change in like your living condition, right? And that's why they're forced to go out to like still sell things in pasar, for example, to still go to work, because it takes some time for them to adjust. So it's not necessarily because of ignorance or because the government is being lenient, because I think that right now, even in Solo, they're always conducting lockdown every now and then, and they're not allowing people to go here during mudik, for example, and they ask you to do PCR, which is very expensive, which is already limiting the way that people can get in and out of a place, for example. So I don't think that it's because of government leniency that they have to compensate for the essential workers in itself. But moreover,
On that
when there
point,
is things like shortage of like bangsal rumah sakit, when people are like blaming the hospital and essential workers instead of the government, people are going to the extent of like hiding their symptoms and their infected family members and not even wanting to go to the hospital, for example. I think that these are the kind of people that makes the circulation of the virus keeps going and going on, right? Because they are not the people that is like crowding the hospital, which are exactly the kind of people that we want to support, because then at least they're reporting themselves, we're able to do census, we're able to know how much vaccine we need to buy, for example, and etc., etc. So actually, I don't think that people coming forward with their symptoms and being open about them being infected and their family being infected is actually a bad thing the moment that you are in a phase where you already have a phase 2 vaccine, right? Don't think that it's that bad. But if we are going to talk about the potential shortage of essential workers, I think that it's a problem to take care of once we are out of a crisis. Because in a monetary crisis, for example, it is unfortunate that we also cannot put forward office worker and labor rights, right? We think that when we want to talk about compensation, it's not in the way that you're going to like put forward these people and just like put aside the people that they're working for, who are like the goal of their work in the very first place is to like to cure other people, for example. So I think that if we want to talk like about the issue about shortage of essential workers, how people are not going to want to be doctors because it's such a like hard job with little to no compensation. It's always been that way. I think that being a doctor, people already know how, for example, if you are lulusan UGM, you have to like do pro bono works for 3 years, about how you work like 24/7. I think people already know that fact and they still want to be a doctor anyway, right? I think that the issue of compensation is not an issue that we can blame to government, and we don't need to be afraid that people are not going to want to be an expert and work in this field, because it's an issue that we can think about once this crisis is over. And I think that the most effective way for us to sped up and to utilize the vaccine effectively is to first give it to the people who don't have equal awareness and knowledge on how to take care of themselves when they already contracted the disease, or how to take care of themselves to avoid the disease in the very first place, right? So I think that in terms of principality, it's better to go with opening opposition. Before I move on to my second idea, yes, POI.
um, Ma'am, it's not factually true. The fact that Indonesian government, central government stopped, for example, the government of JKI from imposing lockdowns and so on and so forth, there was structural hinderment coming from the central government to make sure that people do not take COVID seriously back in March and May, right? So therefore, our point still stands. It's still complicit. And furthermore, you haven't responded to our point
Order.
regarding how you're going to
Order.
disincentivize.
I think it's just a matter of wording, right? Because when you want to like make people work so that your economy keep running, you will not say, okay, people, you're going to die if you go, but you still need to go anyway so that our economy keep running. You're not going to say that. You're of course going to like diminish the problem a little bit so that people can still function, right? It's just a matter of wording. It's not complicitness. I think that Jokowi is smart enough to know that. But second of all, let's talk about the other thing. So Sam has also explained how age is an exclusive natural contributor of complications, right? So if they really want to talk about utility, I think that caring for elderly will be a redundant and way riskier process the moment they already contracted the COVID, and it will cost the people more money and in the health institution more resources. So if we talk about elderly, they have the choice to stay at home, sure, but which if we want to debate about technicalities, I think that most elderlies also do not live alone, whether they live in retirement house with other elderlies and a caretaker, or they live with their working family members, right? So like, or maybe the younger elderly is like 50 and 60 who are still actively working, rely so much on community, whether it's like religious gathering, community gathering like PKK, etc., to maintain their sanity, because that's simply how they have lived for so long, right? That's what I see in my kampung anyway. So I'm pretty sure their family members, their caretakers, and themselves doesn't have access to hazmat suits like what the like what the essential workers have, right? So even if let's say that the vaccine is like 50%, yeah, they have the chance for complication, etc., these people are still going to be a risk of COVID anyway. So now they have two things: they either die of COVID or they die of the vaccine, which if they give to the essential workers might also be the case, right? Because I don't think that as an essential workers you might not have any issues of your own, especially when your health is compromised by being tired of working 24/7 during COVID and etc., etc. So I don't think that the issue of technicalities of efficacy of the vaccine is something that needs to be debated. Oh my God, 7:40. Okay, I rest my case.
Thank you for that speech. That speech marked the end of the opening debate. Now to open the closing government case, I welcome the member of government here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, please wait a minute. I need time to organize my paper. If you want to give POI, just type it on the chat box. I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. So basically, opening bench talks about how the parameter of having of the parameter of this debate is vulnerability, right? About how elderly we need to protect elderly because they're old and so forth and so on, right? But with things, CG thinks that the correct parameter in this debate is not vulnerability. Why? Because it's a very case by case scenario, which like how opposition brought about. There might be essential worker that is old and so, or like not a young people, right? We think the parameter in this debate is one, which one is can get faster COVID medication, but number two, which that will give like a bounce back for the economic when once the COVID is on at the end of the day, right? And we think this is the most important one because this is the very objective parameter at the end of the day. So this is exactly why OO cannot tell you that essential workers are the ones who are young or middle age, right? Because we think there are also people who are aged like 40 or 50 years old at the end of the day who still need to go work outside and not stay at home because they don't have like enough savings at the end of the day, or because they don't have like money to feed their children at the end of the day, right? Before I move on to my substantive, I'm going to talk about how several clarifications and additional mechanisms. So the first one, we think just for clarification, essential worker is not limited to only like tenaga kesehatan, but we're also talking about those Gojek drivers, for example. We're also talking about the supermarket cashier or like SPG that literally helps you and that literally work in the essential sector at the end of the day to provide any basic important necessities for you. But number two, We think that regarding our mechanism, we think vaccine is not the ultimate way to fix the problem of elderly. We think there are other alternatives, right? Because the problem now is not the how the problem now is the fact that elderly could not have like a good hospital, because there are a lot of people live in Wisma Atlet, for example, so they should so they then don't get like good healthcare, right? So CG wants them to be bring betterment for them, and we want them to be safe at the end of the day. So we think there are a good alternative at the end of the day. So I'm going to have two extensions in my speech. Number one, I'm going to talk how this is a betterment to bounce the economy back, that is to say, in the post-COVID. But number two, I'm going to talk about how regarding why is this actually good for elderly at the end of the day. Now to the first one, right? In the post-COVID era, we think that when post-COVID era, most likely government doesn't have like a lot of money to bounce back the economy, right? Because what we need to prioritize right now is how the economy will be sustainable in the long run. We want them to be returned to normal so people can work like before we have COVID, right? Because we want them to be safe and can feed their children, for example. But what is the problem in current status quo, right? Most likely, a lot of workers are fired, right? They're literally jobless because the companies are simply went bankrupt. So they do not have money. So this is exactly, and this usually comes from those who are essential workers at the end of the day, because like it just happened because this is like this like pandemic suddenly happened, right? So they do not have money. This is harmful because of two reasons, right? Number one, they cannot feed these essential workers cannot feed or it cannot have like, any money to live, especially that this is really, really hard if you're living in a COVID era. But number two, there will be no like income for the government. For example, we're talking about like income tax for the government, right? We think that if you prioritize elders rather than these people, they literally cannot have any option to actually do better jobs at the end of the day. Then their life is in danger, right? So that's on the first one. The second layer, I think that the reason why we need to prioritize the essential worker better is because like we need to get money to fix the, and one of the potential source is from the investor, right? So we think that investors really like countries that prioritize their workforce. They like that Indonesia, for example, cares for these essential workers during pandemic at the end of the day. So if in opposition side of the house, you most likely will not get investor because they think that you don't care about their economic at all. You don't care about these people, your people who work literally every day because you do not give them vaccines despite knowing that vaccines are limited and not you cannot get a lot of it at the end of the day, right? So why are these two things my explanation are important? Because you need to understand that if when you have more money coming from the investors and your people, you can get more money to purchase more vaccine to your people, right? You might even be able to get like a good vaccine instead of like how Joko just purchased Sinovac, like a better type of vaccine that can be effective for you. But number two, so that's why we think it's important. Second argument is about how vaccines will be vaccines for these essential workers are better, give betterment for these elders. What you need to understand, ladies and gentlemen, there's a current huge and powerful narrative that says that people do not visit your grandparents, for example, right? If your grandparents live in another place than you cannot spend Christmas for them, or you cannot have like a party like you usually previously have. You need to understand this is like a tradition that Indonesian people most likely have, right? So this is really powerful because people are afraid to lose these elders to prevent the COVID-19 to them, right? We don't want to transmit the potential transmit this virus to these people, right? So the current narrative is really, really powerful to the fact that we do not meet other grandparents, for example. But what happens when you actually give like this vaccine prioritization to the elders? Most likely there will be a normalization that they are already safe. They're vaccinated, they're safe, and we can visit them at the end of the day. They are already protected. they can be safe. So the reason why this is dangerous is because you can give more transmit more virus to them at the end of the day, right? Comparatively, and you're outside of the house, at least this narrative is still powerful enough to make people to not go and have like family tradition or whatsoever, right? It's important to prevent more cases of elders die. So we think it is better in outside of the house when you actually because you actually protect them at the end of the day. We are very proud to people.
Thank you, member of government, for that speech. Now, to open the case of closing opposition, I welcome the member of opposition here.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Okay. Starting my speech in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Government isn't necessarily the most charitable here, right? I think that under opposition, we still support things or other models that support essential workers, right? Just not the vaccine. We still support free healthcare for essential workers. We still give them free masks. We still give them better health protocol and enforce them. And we also give all other essential worker benefits that has been existent largely in the status quo, right? I think that also we still support the things like that, giving them more pay, right? I think that happens in Indonesia, like how their pay is risen by 20% during the pandemic, right? That is what happens. I think that this model itself kicks out OG's and CG's claim, right? CG tried to explain to you that investors won't even come. But since under our side, they're still being taken care of. I mean, the essential workers still get certain benefits, still get certain protection. I think that those kind of things still stand at the end of the day, right? So investors will still come as closing government's claim. Opening government's claim, even weirder, right? They say that the government needs to have reparation, right? So I think that if we're explaining to you that model in the status quo already exists to give this type of reparation or mitigation, that means that we also fulfill their side, right? Because they never compare to what already happens in the status quo. Three things that will be in my speech, right? Number one, I'm going to focus on opening government's idea on government being evil towards essential workers. Secondly, I'm going to explain the idea on like the risk of transmission and why it's hugely symmetrical under both sides. And thirdly, I'm going to explain to you why it matters, like why the risk when you already get COVID is the most important risk that we need to mitigate. POI in chat. Okay, number one, let's go to opening government's claim. Opening government is very weird, right? They claim that government did a really huge fuck up, right? I think that it's weird that they only say that this fuck up only affects essential workers, right? This is not accurate. Because if you have 33% of your population being PDP or ODP, that means that people who are also old are also affected by this, right? Your fuck up isn't only you need to pay reparation toward essential workers, but it also affects the amount of people who gets COVID to begin with and hence increases the risk of others to actually get these type of diseases as well, right? Now, number two, if it is true that government is the one that does most of the fuck ups, I think that this is exactly why their case basically self-defeats themselves, right? Because this means that their case that talks about elderly has a choice and they need to stay home. Maybe because of this government fuck up and they say themselves it's that big and they are not able to control the spread. This is the moment where your home isn't even safe anymore, because this means that the people around you or the people, your local milkman, for example, milkman doesn't exist, your local newsman, for example, or your local Gojek or whatever it is, or when you are going to visit in the market, even though it is minimal, it still has more risk, like more risk at the end of the day, right? I think that those kind of things. That is why don't go for opening government's argument on elderly people having the agency to just stay at home, or because maybe that doesn't necessarily mitigate all the risks that they can actually get, right? That's also a big assumption anyway, right? OG and CG cannot just say that elderly people have the choice that they can just go home, right? I think that this is very, very, like, this is equity violation level of assumption, right? This is like such a big overgeneralization because not everyone has their own homes, right? Maybe some people live in crowded community areas, right? Maybe some people like live with their families and their families are the one who gets COVID because maybe they are, I don't know, like working somewhere else, right? I think that you cannot, please just do not buy government's claim on that, right? Because it's a really huge overgeneralization on how old people live. It's simply not realistic. Number two, let's go on the risk that happens, right? I think that what happens on the risk is, I think it's actually symmetrical, right? I've already told you that reparations have already been paid, and that's why opening government's principle basically falls. And I already explained that these type of mitigation of risk. For example, giving them masks, having better health protocols. Those type of things already exist to protect essential workers, which is exactly why it's the problem is hugely symmetrical, right? I mean, even if it's not, I'm still going to explain why the most important is to mitigate is the part on where you already get COVID, right? But before that, I think that there are already reasons that mitigate it. I think that government needs to basically answer the burden on why this type of mitigation in status quo is not enough and why they need to jump into vaccines, right? Because they cannot just simply say that essential workers would get COVID and because they have like all risk whatsoever, right? I think that what they need to explain first is why status quo is not enough. And I think that I've already explained how status quo has a lot of models already, how we have already policies to protect and give safety nets towards essential workers that would not work on all people. I'm going to explain that later on. But anyway, the idea that that you already have like free masks, that you already have reinforced health protocols, you have already have like PSBB lockdowns that happens like basically everywhere. I know that Jakarta is shit at that, but like almost every other places on that is actually even better. We don't want Jakarta as the sore example that is not nuanced, and we don't have to always defend like the very worst case of like it's only being Jakarta. And even if it is, that also means like all people also get transmitted anyway if it's that bad. So and it's not necessarily therefore because it's that bad. So yeah, the risk is symmetrical because government says themselves that the fuck up is really bad, but like we're going to explain that they already have like signs of mitigation, especially to mitigate it towards like essential workers. It already exists in hospitals. It already exists anywhere else, like where they're given free hand sanitizers, when they're given like um like as safe as possible, like hazmat suits or whatever. I think that those type of things are already being done by the government to mitigate those risks, right? Okay, so the most important part is the fact that we would decrease fatality, right? So even if government has a marginal amount of people getting sick and getting afflicted by COVID, I think that's like fine as long as we are able to save more people, right? Because on the opposition side of the house, this means that we would save more people at the end of the day because these people are the ones more afflicted, right? I've already explained that that old people cannot just go to Wisma Atlet because ventilators do not work on them anymore, right? These medicines that affect their lungs, that makes it hard for you to breathe and basically has increased fatality, has like really high risk for old people because of this, right? So the status quo mechanism doesn't necessarily work for old people, right? This is why they need the vaccine even more. Because ventilators doesn't work, Wisma Atlet doesn't work, and the detection rate is very hard on old people because they usually die within the third day of showing symptoms, right? This is exactly why it's more important to save fatalities because this means that old people who get afflicted will 80% of the times die. And young people, I've already explained, there are a lot of safety nets, like essential workers. They have free healthcare in Wisma Atlet. They have like all those safety nets that government actually explained. And this is more important. This is more important than OO because they never explain what status quo looks like. I'm very proud to oppose the motion.
Check. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible.
Okay, cool. Okay, hold on. Let me just set my timer real quick. Okay. Is my voice loud and clear? Hello?
Well, yeah,
Check.
so far you're clear.
Okay, sure. If anyone wants to give your eye, please give them through chat. And if at any point in time my voice is like cracking or like not audible, please kindly chat me in the chat box, yeah. Since my internet is so bad. All right, I'm gonna start in 3, 2, 1. The parameter that opening debate and to some extent CO use is the scale of vulnerability of individuals between two actors, which is the elderly and essential worker. CG find that this effort to be useless and futile. Why? Number one is because vulnerability is a very much subjective matter, and we think that the parameter of public policy should not be case per case scenario, but the general interest of the public, which are two. Number one is COVID mitigation, and number two, economic bounce back. Why vulnerability is a very much subjective matter is because just because someone is under one age bracket demographic, for example, like above 60 years old, does not mean that they have similar circumstances. However, when we are talking about essential worker, they have the underlying pattern and the grievances and the struggles that they have on a daily basis, and it is the high transmission risk that they face on a day-to-day basis. So based on that reason, we think that the vulnerability should not be the basis on us judging this debate, but on the future, how high is the possibility of those individuals to transmit and infect the disease to individuals around them. And we think that essential workers by nature have a significantly larger, much possibility in order to transmit people around them due to the nature of their work. For example, a Gojek driver, that they need to deliver food or passenger to their homes, or for example, like people like construction workers that they need to meet a lot of people under the policy of not under the policy of social distancing. So we think that under that reason, because of the transmission risk is very much larger in essential worker, we think that in order for us to mitigate COVID from further like infecting Indonesia, we need to do this on our side, right? And that is why Momo argument is very much important about economic rejuvenation and COVID mitigation, because we think that the importance that we give, and this is exclusive from CG, is that we give vaccine to essential worker because that is the precondition to afford more vaccine in the future. We have three layers on this. Number one is that we provide urgency, that currently we have economic recession during COVID, and government does not have much income anymore from taxes and other incomes. However, we need to keep the money coming for us to be able to afford more budget, so more vaccines, right? So we do not have to face the situation where giving vaccines is a trade-off between individuals. So we think that based on this urgency, CG has take this debate, right? But then we add another two additional layers in terms of why this is very important. Because number one, we say that investor will regain confidence, right? Because we think that giving vaccine is the ultimate proof of how a country allocates scarce resources and crisis management, and determining the confidence of investor or whether or not they want to invest or not in that particular country. And then CEO said, no, we'll be able to give full score, and that does not change anything. Our case is still increasing day per day. Just today we have 300,000
I'm sorry.
cases,
I'm sorry.
and we
You're kind of
think
breaking.
that
Hello.
not help. In order to win this debate, CEO needs to prove you why current methods are working. Check everyone.
Hello. You weren't audible. I stopped my stopwatch at 3:30.
Hello.
Hi. Yes, you're audible now.
Oke, sure. Tadi sampai mana ya?
My
Slide-nya.
stopwatch is at 3:30 when you said essential resource management.
Okay, sure. Okay, I'm going to start now in 3, 2, 1. And that's why giving vaccine is the ultimate proof of how a country allocates scarce resources and crisis management, which is going to determine the confidence of investor. And then CEO come to this debate and say, no, we already give masks, we already like apply health protocol, and people are complying to that. And we think that is not enough, clearly, because every day the cases of individuals getting COVID is increasing. Just today we have 15,000 cases, and we think that is simply not enough in comparison to the giving vaccines, right? So we think that CEO cannot just run away in this debate and say it like, no, status quo is enough, because clearly it's not enough. And in order to prove that assertion, CEO needs to give evidence and like examples in terms of how that type of current mechanism is going to work, which I didn't hear until now. But also, I think in terms of that, CG is also giving you exclusive contribution in terms of explaining that right now we have more circulation of money, right? Because right now the essential workers are working and then they are confident in working because they are already having vaccine. We think that we will be able to give more circulation of money and then resulting in the government having more budget in order to afford more vaccines in the future. And we think this is very crucial because we think that getting more money to be able to afford more vaccines is what we need to prioritize as a country, right? Now, before I proceed to rebuttals to OO, right, I'm going to give independent rebuttal to CO because what CO talked to you is essentially that you know what elderly people are also working as essential worker. Exactly. Given the intersection between essential worker and other demographics, then we need to prioritize essential worker because that demographic of essential worker encompasses a lot of other demographics, right? If you only vaccinate the elderly, it means that you only cover one demographic that does not encapsulate other type of demographics. And I think just based on that reason, CO already lose this debate. But also, no one answered in this debate, right? Why the elderly will be able to like get infected through COVID. CG is the only one that explained that due to the family structures, the housing structures in Indonesia, that a lot of elderly are living with their family members who happen to be essential workers to maintain their livelihood, then they get infected. So we think that we explained to the correlation why when we vaccinate essential workers, it means that we can also minimize the elderly getting infected due to the comparison that we made, right? But lastly, I'm going to rebut OO, right? Why they cannot win this debate. We think that what OO said is that elderly is more vulnerable, right? Because like the complication to other disease. We think that this already happened, but vaccinating elderly will not solve this problem because the people that have diseases like kidney or heart problem or other like illnesses like that are not limited to individuals above 60 years old. Everyone can get that disease, and in fact people in their 40s or 50s due to the lifestyle changes are already infected with these diseases. And then the moment we vaccinate elderly only, they cannot be protected because everyone is getting the hospital beds because of COVID. So we think that just because like they are in fact not infected by COVID right now, does not mean that they cannot get this complication, right? Because like the hospital beds are full with essential workers that are dying in hospital beds right now due to COVID, it means that it's also going to make a trade-off between these individuals that cannot get this hospital bed. So we think that in general, they cannot prove to you why the trade-off is going to be exclusive on our side. On the same time, they cannot make a clear clarity in terms of why their benefit is exclusive. We are very proud to
Thank you for that speech, Government Whip. Now to conclude the entire debate, I welcome the opposition whip here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Oh, sorry, my stopwatch fell. Okay, wait. Okay. Okay. Starting my speech in three, two, one. So rebuttals regarding the speaker from the CG. First of all, they claim that the reason why the CEO falls is because we claim that most elderly are essential workers, which is false because we are not the one who brought up that argument. That was OO's case. And then second of all, they brought up like regarding like the reason why we should give vaccines to essential workers is because like regarding the confidence of investment, right? Because like not investors don't want to invest in Indonesia if essential workers are infected. To which we want to rebut by saying that investors are smarter than that. They don't simply invest in out of like one-dimensional assessment like that. So, for example, if the rate of death in Indonesia is all-time high because the elderly does not receive vaccine and the elderly kept on passing away left and right, that is not a good picture for Indonesia as well. And investors still don't want to invest in things like that. So therefore, we want to conclude that it's such a big a big burden that the CG is imposing to the CO, to the opposition, right? Because like it's not like just because you give vaccines to the essential workers that suddenly investors think that it is such a good idea to invest in Indonesia. There's no long-term like process analysis to why such thing can happen, right? And before we go into like further rebuttals, I would like to give you like comparison, right? The reason why the reason why OG case fails completely is because like already rebutted by my teammates that like essential workers do not need more attention from the government because we have already provided everything that they needed. And the reason why that happens is because economy in times of crisis like this is such an important time to prioritize economy. And therefore, like if like essential workers cannot work anymore, unlike what the CG has said, like government does not want that to happen, right? Because like if essential workers cannot work, eventually the country will go bankrupt because nobody works, right? And that is not something that people want. The government wants. So therefore, the government will try their best to ensure that the essential workers will get whatever they need. Which is, but in our case, we don't want them to get the vaccine. That they can get anything they want, but not the vaccine because the elderly is the one who needs it the most. Like a few characterizations of the elderly, right? My teammate has already explained to you that elderly people are physically they are weaker, right? They suffer from like ventilation problems and etc. But also there is the fact that elderly people have so many complications to the point that they live in a hospital. So they are as vulnerable to like these like doctors that the other teams are trying to portray, right? So like they live in hospital or they live with people who are essential workers, and or maybe they live in like elderly house where they have to meet people daily. They are in a more vulnerable state. So imagine this, like even like imagine this, like if this is the if the debate is regarding like spread, it's we would like to say it's not, because most likely that it is symmetrical, and government needs to explain where the like why the problem of spread is like completely one dimensional. Because like the reason why spread is such an issue is not just because like we're not giving vaccines to essential workers, but it's also because like people just don't give a damn about like the rules that is that is given by the government. And and like people just don't like people just take off of their mask even if the government gives it to them and things like that. So like if if we want to curb the spread by giving the people by giving essential workers vaccine, is that it does not ensure that in the long run that it will curb the numbers of infection anyways. And so it doesn't work. They need to give us more process analysis of why it's 100% true. um, uh, and then going to my like second and then going to my second comparison to the CG, the reason why going to my more comparisons, the reason why CG does not CG's argument falls is because like they argue that they also argue that by giving elderly vaccines is actually really detrimental to the elderly, because it would normalize that elderly are safe because they get the vaccines. To which we say that is completely false. Like for example, uh, just because the elderly are giving vaccine, it does not mean they can suddenly like walk away like Jesus, right? Jesus on water and stuff like that, right? They still need to be taken care of. Doesn't mean just because you give like a certain vaccine to people that you suddenly conclude that these people are safe to go out and have their day. So we don't understand why like this normalization can happen, which makes it like a really ridiculous argument in the first place. And then like the reason why our argument goes above OO is because like not only we're trying to prove that government is already giving their best to essential workers, with masks and etc. But we also prove to you, even if government has not given their best for essential workers, it is still within our best interest to take care of the. It is still within our best interest to take care of the elderly more, just because and it's because like they're in the same vulnerable situation, and not just because of their illnesses, but it's also because of their location and their like background and etc. But not only that is that like essential workers can survive there infected, but like elderly simply cannot. um wait wait. And then like it's also like there's also like the reason why last comparison, the reason why OG argument falls is because they have this long-term idea that if health workers are not prioritized, then people do not want to be doctors anymore, to which we think it's a weird statement, because like doctors in the first place and essential workers in the first place, they when they sign up to work, they have like so many motives to why they want to work there. Like for example, like when people want to become doctor, they could be inherently altruistic, so that they know the risks of their work. They have to put other people first. Like for example, when the virus first break out, like a lot of doctors, like what is it called? They actually like want to go to the place to the virus because they're inherently altruistic. So therefore, we don't see like why essential workers suddenly like don't want to be essential workers anymore. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for the debate. Now, we will do some deliberation and then for like several minutes, and then we'll come back to tell you the decisions. Thank you.